Good evening. The Met Office has issued 15 snow or ice warnings tonight, covering Northern Ireland, all of Wales and most areas of England and Scotland. It follows a day of disruption in much of the UK with dangerous conditions on major roads and the RAC warning that things could get worse. The runway at Stansted Airport was closed twice during the day, with a number of flights cancelled, and thousands of homes have been left without power. Our correspondent Phil Mackey has the latest for us.
The motorway at a standstill. It's always busy here anyway, but throw in 5 centimetres of snow and you've got chaos. On the A14, things were even worse. This lorry span out of control, leaving drivers stranded.
Good morning. Past 10 o'clock in the morning. And as you can see, we're stationary here on the A14, not going anywhere. I've been here for 5 hours and so have these.
My name's Tara. I'm on the A14 trying to go eastbound to Northampton. Set off from my house in Hinckley at 6 a.m. this morning. I've been on the A14 for 3 hours now. As you can see, there's nothing going in the other direction. Some Canadians, so I'm used to this kind of weather. I know you guys aren't.
In the end, they were stuck for 7 hours before the road was cleared. And it wasn't just the roads. Stansted Airport had to close twice to clear snow from the runway. Birmingham Airport had to do the same for a short while too. And the weather kept ground crews busy as planes needed to be constantly de-iced. A swathe of central and southern England was worst affected, from Gloucestershire to Warwickshire to the Chilterns. And it didn't just lead to hazardous driving conditions, but thousands of homes lost power too.
Obviously the snow came in, it settles on our overhead conductor, and then with the cold wind chill as well coming in, that then freezes it into ice, and then therefore that takes the conductors down. And likewise does the same with tree branches, which would normally not be near the line but have taken our conductors down.
As the snow started to melt, there was a new danger. Flood warnings followed the thaw as streams became swollen and started to rise. That meant more hazards to negotiate, and not everyone made it.
It's really been a difficult day here in Warwickshire. They've had flooding, snow and power cuts, and to get around you really needed a specialist vehicle.
And tonight there's another warning as temperatures have fallen. The snow and slush has begun to freeze. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Warwickshire.
Well, as I was saying, the Met Office warnings apply to most parts of the UK tonight, including the southeast of England. So let's join our correspondent, Wira Davis, who's in Hendon in North London, with the latest on the conditions and what they're saying there. Wira?
Yeah, well, here, these are the kind of wintry weather conditions that might make Scots and Scandinavians scoff. But as we saw in Phil Mackey's report, it wasn't a lot of snow fell in one particular place, but the huge sway in particular central, southern England and parts of Wales were affected by those sub-zero temperatures, and that had an effect on much of the transport networks, roads, rail and in particular airports. Now those icy conditions are set to continue throughout much of the country. Those 15 weather warnings issued by the Met Office tonight, and basically much of the UK will experience those sub-zero temperatures. This is one of the main arteries out of London tonight, the M1, and it seems that many drivers have heeded the advice of the RAC and the police to take extreme caution and care if you are out driving tonight and tomorrow morning. The good news is that we'll get better by the end of the week, but be careful if you're going out on the roads tonight, or indeed if you're walking on those icy footpaths. Back to you.
Wira, thanks very much again for the latest there in Hendon in North London. Wira Davis for us. Now, in Syria, aid workers have started to move critically ill children from a rebel-held suburb near the capital, Damascus. 4 patients were taken out of Ghouta overnight. Another 25 are expected to be moved in the coming days. Hundreds more are in urgent need of treatment. Some 400,000 residents have been under siege by government forces since 2013. From Beirut, our correspondent Martin Patience sent this report.
7-year-old NJ is preparing for a short journey, and it will almost certainly end up saving her life. She's suffering from haemophilia, but last night she was among 4 critically ill patients to be evacuated to Damascus for life-saving treatment. This is what she's leaving behind. Eastern Ghouta is one of the last remaining rebel strongholds fighting the government of Bashar al-Assad. It's been bombed and besieged for 4 years, with fighting intensifying in recent weeks.
I think it's a combination of everybody's efforts that at this really low time in Syria there is a ray of light, and it's the children who are missing growing up in Syria. We must sort them out to give Syria a chance of a prosperous, peaceful future.
But food is hard to come by. Malnutrition is now widespread. Human rights groups accuse the Syrian government of carving the rebels into submission. This evacuation may have the appearances of a humanitarian gesture, but that's simply not the case. We've been told by 2 sources that the Syrian government only agreed to it as part of a prisoner exchange. The main rebel faction in eastern Ghouta agreed to free 29 Syrian government hostages, and in return, the same number of critical patients are being allowed to receive urgent medical care. But the United Nations says hundreds of others need to be evacuated. Among them, 3-month-old Karim, who was injured by government shelling. He lost his left eye. His mother was killed. Despite a prominent social media campaign, he's not being allowed to leave eastern Ghouta.
Karim is injured. He's going to lose his sight. Here in the Ghouta, he can't get treated. The doctor wants to perform an operation so that he doesn't lose the sight in his other eye.
For some, there is no hope, but for most, help is not coming anytime soon. Martin Patience, BBC News, Beirut.
Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. The Ukrainian government and Russian-backed rebels have completed the biggest prisoner exchange since the conflict began nearly 4 years ago. The Red Cross says more than 230 people have now crossed the checkpoint back into rebel-held territory. The Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, which was heavily criticised after the Grenfell Tower fire, will hand responsibility for almost 10,000 properties to the local council by the end of January. A consultation into the future management of the properties will take place soon. 61-year-old Lorraine Stevenson and 41-year-old PC Dave Fields have been named as the 2 people who died following a crash in Sheffield on Christmas Day. The officers' family said they were devastated and heartbroken by their loss. The former US President Barack Obama, in one of his few interviews since leaving office last January, has warned about the irresponsible use of social media. Social media was in some cases distorting people's understanding of complex issues, spreading misinformation and reinforcing people's bias. Mr. Obama was interviewed by Prince Harry in his capacity as guest editor of Radio 4's Today programme, as our royal correspondent Nicholas tells us.
Prince Harry, first of all, you are very welcome to our studio.
Good morning.
Joining the Today programme for the day had been a big learning curve, Harry said, but he'd enjoyed being the interviewer rather than the interviewed.
It was quite fun, especially interviewing President Obama.
His principal scoop had been to persuade Barack Obama to give his first interview since standing down as US President. The word Trump was never mentioned, but may have been in Mr. Obama's mind when he warned about the use of social media.
All of us in leadership have to find ways in which we can recreate a common space on the internet. One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases.
Harry had also interviewed his father. The main focus had been on climate change, the issue Prince Charles has championed for decades and for which he was sometimes derided.
Maybe now, some years later, they're beginning to realise that what I was trying to say may not have been quite as dotty as they thought. But, I mean, the issue really that has to go on being focused on, big time, I think, is this one around the whole issue of climate change, which, you know, now, whether we like it or not, is the biggest threat multiplier we face.
And then at the end of the programme, it was time to face questions rather than to ask them. First, about his fiancée, Meghan Markle, and her first Christmas at Sandringham.
She really enjoyed it. The family loved having her there. And, you know, it's, yeah, that's there's always that family part of Christmas was always that work element as well. And I think, together we had an amazing time. We had, great fun staying with my brother and sister-in-law.
Harry's commitment to issues he cares about, like the armed forces and mental health, had come through strongly. So how does he...
Part of my role and part of my job is to shine a spotlight on issues that need that spotlight, whether it's people, whether it's causes, whether it's issues, whatever it is. So I will continue to do play my part in society, do my job to the best of my ability, so that I in the morning feel energized and go to bed hopefully knowing that I've done the best that I can.
Not so long ago, Harry admitted to having doubts about a royal role. Clearly, no longer. Nicholas Witchell in News.
For decades, conservationists in Africa have struggled to preserve the continent's elephant population using a variety of techniques and methods to prevent poaching. Now, an organisation that manages national parks across 9 African countries is using military tactics to try to deal with the poachers. One of their big success stories has been in Chad at the Zakouma National Park, where 90% of elephants were lost over 4 decades. When African parks took over, there were fewer than 500 left. Our correspondent Alistair Leith had travelled to the remote region where the elephant population is finally recovering.
They were the herd heading for extinction, but the elephants of Zakouma National Park have made a dramatic recovery.
Before, there used to be elephant carcasses everywhere.
So what's the difference been since African Parks took over?
Since African Parks arrived here, we no longer see carcasses of elephants in the park.
Across the continent, a private, not-for-profit conservation group called African Parks believes it has the answer to saving Africa's disappearing wildlife, and it's controversial. They are rangers and giving them military-style training. In some places, it's become a war against poachers. Adoum Alam is a sniper with Fast Response Unit Mamba No. 2. His father was killed by poachers in this park. He jumped at the chance to join up. It's a very dangerous job, but I love doing it, he said. It's a good income, but it's also personal. This was Zakouma 10 years ago. Decades of poaching killed 90% of the park's elephants, and many rangers as well. But today, it's a much healthier picture. They haven't lost an elephant in 2 years, or a ranger since 2012. And last year, the population started to grow again.
There were more than 20,000 elephants in this park just 40 years ago, but now there are just over 500. What's encouraging, though, is that they've now got babies. They're reproducing. Their numbers are starting to go up. And if the poachers can be kept at bay, their population's going to recover.
This is the best way to counter raids from the heavily armed Sudanese horsemen, the main perpetrators who've been poaching ivory here for centuries. But now both sides have automatic weapons. And local communities are a key to success. Schools are being built. Kids are learning about conservation. Villagers now often tip off the rangers if poachers are seen nearby.
African parks take on delegated management of protected areas in Africa. Normally, where public sector has failed, African parks will step in and with donor funding will then manage protected areas.
But eventually it should pay for itself. Zakouma's now attracting high-end adventure tourists who cover a third of the park's budget. Other marginal reserves in Africa will never make money. Animals have to be worth more alive than dead, not just to rich Westerners, but to local people as well. Alistair Leith, BBC News, Zakouma National Park in Chad.
Right, it's time to catch up with today's sports news. So let's join Mark at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Hugh. Well, another day, another record for Pep Guardiola's Manchester City side. They beat Newcastle 1-0 at St James's Park for an unprecedented 18th straight win in the Premier League. They're now 15 points clear at the top. Natalie Perks was watching this one for us. That's it from me, but if you want to keep up to date with all the latest sports news, you should head to the BBC Sport website. Back to you, Hugh.
Mark, thanks very much. Mark Edwards there for us at the BBC Sports Centre. More on today's stories, of course, on the BBC News channel. But that's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.